know me, my name is Peter. I work in student development as a hall director for Brenninger and Garrick. So this is my 3rd year here, and I get the pleasure of kind of hosting him around here. So maybe we'll go around and then I'll introduce you when we have a Zoom lecture, and we can kind of start there.
Well, since you went out, Barb Bird, Dean of Faculty Development, Director of this center.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been here 20 years, and my kids were in Garrick. That is the best hall. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Prior to my time.
Yes, yeah, they graduated 10 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
I'm Sarah Justice. I'm an assistant professor in biology. This is my 7th year here.
Sylvana Bielko. I'm in public health, and this is my 4th year, starting my 4th year.
Oh, Janelle Hart. This is my 28th year actually here. So long history, but I'm now in faculty development and the BCTLE office.
Well, I mean, this is Sarpiya. Dr. Sarpiya was our chapel speaker this morning and is here for a variety of things. Currently is the executive director for the Center of Nonviolence and Conflict Transformation. It was prior the moderator for the Church of the Brethren. So we brought him here to help us a student development core value that we have called flourishing diversity, to talk a little bit about diversity and race relations, as well as coming for chapel and a variety of other workshops. But he's here today to talk a little bit about classroom transformation techniques, and I guess transformation techniques and how they can apply to the classroom. And he's going to talk a little bit about his context working in Rockford in a school there. So
That's great. Well, do you want to go ahead and get started? This is being recorded, so everybody knows that.
Are we?
okay.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm truly, it's a joy to be a Taylor finally. My first time at Taylor, so it's been a wonderful day so far, and it's definitely going to go. It's definitely going up on one of my good campus visits. if Peter remains good, but so far it doesn't look like it's going to change. So it's a little bit about me. I don't know if you were at faculty. I know Peter said I am the director of the Center for Nonviolence. Yes, the Center for Nonviolence and Conflict Transformation is actually located in Rockford, Illinois, where I have lived for a little over 10 years. But prior to that, I was a pastor, church planter pastor in Illinois, as well as the moderator for the Church of the Brethren. And so, but prior to that, I had served with Youth of the Nation, University of the Nations in Kona, Hawaii, suffering for Jesus on the island. Right?
Yeah.
But currently I'm based in Quebec, Canada. But most of my work takes me, before COVID, most of my work takes me around different places and different institutions to talk about. We live in a world that is increasingly, when we look at the state of our world, conflict is becoming like almost everywhere. And so even though my paper says I'm talking about conflict transformation, but how do you take conflict transformation from just this abstract idea into actual classroom? So I will tell you stories about some of the strategies that I have adopted as a pastoral community organizer. And I know the word community organizer has a very bad rap in some circles.
No, we like it here.
Because some circles, when you say community organizer, it's just like one of those people that just wants to go protest for everything. Yeah, so in some of my community organizing work in Rockford, Illinois, specifically with in a US context, and I can tell you of some other contexts. I can talk to you about contexts in Europe, like in Denmark, where I visit every summer to talk about reintegrating Danish teens or Danish adults that have gone to join radical Islam and trying to reintegrate them back into society. Or I can talk to you about Boko Haram, how is the Nigerian government working with radical Islam and how I'm helping them to reimagine some approaches that they can really mitigate rather than continue bombing. And I know people say, yeah, bomb works. I don't know. There's no evidence to show anywhere. Data has proven bombs have not, there's no any anecdotal evidence to show that bombs are effective. So conflict transformation, basically conflict transformation is more than just a set of specific steps. It is a way of looking and seeing, and it provides a set of lenses through which we make sense of conflict. These lenses draw our attention to certain amongst classmates, amongst peers, and what happens is oftentimes the conflict we see in the context, usually the conflict that takes place in a classroom often is not usually the real, you only see the fruit manifesting itself in the classroom. And so what then happens is, so you have to look deeply and peer into the conflict and look at what is the underlying condition. Because when we don't understand when we don't see beyond the current condition, we assume that what we're seeing is the root cause of the problem. But oftentimes it's beyond that. And I'll tell you more as we proceed. So, but conflict transformation itself, according to John Paul Lederach, the person I was saying, who is foremost voice. When I say foremost voice, in the church context, John Paul Lederach is a professor emeritus from Eastern Mennonite University, as well as Notre Dame here in Kokomo, Indiana. Wait, no, Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. So he says conflict transformation is the ability to envision and respond to the ebb and flow of life-given opportunities, creating constructive change process that reduces violence, increases justice, indirect iteration with social structures that respond to real-life problems in human relationship. Let me unpack that a little bit by telling a story. The Rockford West Middle School, like any other American cities, most especially in the Midwest, where there's the Rust Belt, factories have all been shipped out of the country, and we're seeing just this boarded factories, old factory buildings, boarded neighborhood. There's no more dollars to fund. There's no tax dollars from those companies that used to be available to fund those public schools. And so you find out that the public schools themselves are then, with the massive movement of people from the inner city to the suburbs, all the good schools have moved from the fringes of the inner city to the suburbs. And like in the Rockford region, of course, God bless the city of Rockford, they were so smart at that point to get free money from Chicago. When the city of Chicago was expanding housing projects, they encouraged the city of Rockford, oh, we can give you some of our housing projects. We will give you the money to build housing projects back in the 70s. And the government, the city of Rockford accepted 60s and the 70s, accepted money from the Chicago government, the city of Chicago, because, oh, they're just giving us, there's no such thing as free money for free housing. Right? So they built this massive, just like Caprini Green, massive housing project. And then you have massive housing project, and then you pile all socioeconomically challenged people together. And then the city of Rockford again added a caveat to this kind of a housing project. We'll give housing accommodation to single moms. If they're married, we won't give them poor people housing. It defies every single, we're up. The welfare of single moms is really key, and if we can help them. But when you have many single moms with different baby daddies, with different boyfriends, or probably the baby daddy's in jail, and so she starts dating another guy, or they break up with that guy. So here she is, exposed to every vulnerability in a tough neighborhood that she's single. So she, of course, obviously have to get another guy. either to protect her from the previous boyfriend or to protect her. And then he immediately in turn becomes abusive. And it takes out the abuse on her and it impacts the children. And so the children show up in school like monsters, and you wonder, why is this child? Is there anything that we educators are doing that is making a monster out of this child? But the educators has nothing. They have done nothing. It is the underlying condition of this children's sociological location that really place them in a place that is difficult. So in conflict transformation, you begin to look at what is that, to envision, and you envision the challenge, the problem, and you envision and what are new opportunities that we can work toward changing the status quo. And so I always ask the question, can the gospel transform a community? This is when I ask the question, can the gospel transform a community? Honestly, I'm not asking, can the Bible change anyone? I'm asking, can the followers of Jesus through their vocation transform a community? And I'm convinced it is possible. It is possible because Jesus said it is possible. Because he said, I'll just paraphrase through all the different gospels. He said, you are a city on a hill, a city that cannot be hidden. You are the salt of the earth. Jesus keeps dropping all these nuggets. Love your neighbor. And he drops all of this, and you know, we can say, oh, it's Jesus, that's why he's talking like that. No, he knew it is doable. That's why he made those comments. So as an educator or as, I am convinced that your vocation, you are called for such a vacation for such a time as this, because we're living in a very challenging time. And the moment you see your work, your call, your vocation as your teaching, not just as a work, but as a sense of call to transform that life that you transform in that classroom has a tendency to have a meaningful impact beyond the classroom. I personally am a product of a history teacher that really molded and shaped me and championed me. I am not sure the history teacher will ever thought that somebody like me, a knucklehead teenager, will stand before educators and say to them, yeah, this is me, without going into detail of my past life. So if the gospel can transform a community, how does transformational practice look like? How would it look like? So I'll tell you 3 stories. I'll tell you one story that is intricately connected, but there's so many strands. But this particular story gives the context. So I'll give you the context before I play you the news clip. I have just arrived, moved from Hawaii to Rockford, Illinois, planting a church, building all the network and connection that needs to be. And I have always this sense of reconciliation and peace. So I was working with all the clergy. You know, we clergies know how to associate with clergy, to have our own coffee and all of that. So I was organizing a community for us to kind of have a reconciliation gathering where we can try to begin to really deal with this racial tension that exists in our city because of the west side and the east side. And so just weeks before the day of the event, 2 white police officers shot a teenager in the basement of a classroom, on a basement of a church, a black church, and next to a daycare with about 20 plus kids in the daycare. And so the incident played itself out. There was a riot in the city. There was looting and burning. We had Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, all the news media. This was in 2009. At that point, nobody has ever thought about a reader of Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. And so against this backdrop, as a peacemaker and a pastor, I began to ask the question, what can we do to tool ourselves? So I'll play the clip for you, the clip, and then I'll continue with that context. This might not be the loudest one, but
News tonight, the Mark Barmore shooting, which occurred about 2.5 months ago, is still fresh on the minds of many of us.
Some community leaders are hoping to use the incident as a catalyst for helpful change, and they're starting that process today. You may remember back on August 24th, Mark Barmore was shot and killed by 2 Rockford police officers in the basement of a church daycare. He was running for police. Using the philosophy of nonviolent conflict resolution, about 20 community leaders spending 2 days learning how to avoid the tensions which flared up after the Barmore shooting. It led one local pastor to create this event.
Looking at the Barmore situation, and as a pastor in the city, I'm like, there's just got to be a way. And I just felt it would be good to convene a peace session whereby we begin to train ourselves on how do we deal with a situation like. So my underground, how does transformation practices look like? So when this incident happened, and I was already doing my graduate program in peace studies from the University of Rhode Island. And the next knee-jerk reaction that my human response is, if I can get people together, that would be one. The next question I need to ask is, what is the underlying condition? What is it that made this teenager drop out of school? Why was this teenager killed? I had a reason. My first reason behind all of this is I want to get to the underlying because this was not the first occurrence of white police officers killing an African American. But I wanted to get to it by way of addressing the underlying condition without confrontation. The human reaction is to confront the police department and to say this and that about, and really cuss them out. But as a peacemaker and somebody who really longs to see conflict transformation, I began to ask the question, what can we do? So I went in and found out so I did an background search about this teenager. What is it that made him, he was a middle school dropout, sorry. He dropped out of this middle school that I'm going to take you through the kind of some transformation practices that happened in the school. So this is all of this is preparing you just for it, right? So as a middle school dropout, he dropped out of school because of the conditions that I just explained about living in a housing project. And with his father in jail and his mother has boyfriends, that it's just constant tension. And the story goes that whenever, the day that you get the welfare check, the next couple of days is a hell on earth. Because there's drunken party, there's drinking, there's all kinds of alcohol. And so he shows up in school. What is school for me? I'm not interested in the school. I'm not interested in education. Not that he doesn't want education, but I believe the underlying condition behind the home environment impacted his ability to concentrate. And so when he comes to school and the teacher is backing orders, and by the way, this school that I'm talking about is called West Middle School, and West Middle Schools have had 6 principals in 5 years. That says it all. And the longest serving teacher has served there for 2 years. And this is a school with 98% African American, with 99% white teachers. 2 years experience. Everything around the school spells a recipe for disaster. So after this training as a community leader, I said, how can we inculcate how can we help to bring a change in the school? The first step that I took was to begin to introduce what we call the parent-teacher organization, PTO. There was no PTO in the school. Initially there was, and then it went dormant and nothing was going on. And so with the introduction of PTO, it began to change the trajectory of the school. And so you will see the video of the PTO, but I'll talk around it before you see the video. When we introduced the PTO, I went to the highway and the byway, and I'll say this to you. And then sometimes I even use guilt to guilt people into volunteering, but in an affirmative way, not in a guilt that puts you in a guilt trip that sends you south, but you see, if you don't do it, who else? That's a guilt trip, but it's almost twisting your arm twisting. But in a positive way, that if we together can do this, this school has about 970 students. And I went on a campaign on a goal to raise 1,000 volunteers. That's one child per volunteer. And the reason why I wanted that is the presence of adults in the school. Not just because I want to get more bodies into the school, but because the presence of adult and a stable adult gives these children from a predominantly broken home a sense of belonging. And what makes it even worse is the school system actually create unintentional gang rivalry in the school because of the transportation system. And so there are multiple facets we need to approach transformation, educational transformation from a multiple dimension. It's not just one track. We do this and then that's it. And added to the dimension of this school is when there's no enough budget, every after-school program is cut off. So once the introduction of the parent-teacher organization, well, I found out that there's no after-school activities, so the first things we introduced cooking. So that means somebody going to the highway and the byway and finding restaurants and asking them to please come. Do you have a chef that have a skill? Do you have somebody that loves cooking, that is passionate? It doesn't have to be sitting in the classroom, but to organize an after-school program. So I met my friend Kate, is a HR for a casino in Chicago. Somebody in my denomination frown against casino. You don't go close to a casino because, man, if you do that, my ordination will be stripped from me. But beyond ordination, I look at the kids and the transformation that's needed. My friend works in a casino. I'm not the one working in a casino. I'm not gambling. So I ask her, what can you do? Because as a human resource for a casino with over 2,000 employees, she knows people. People know people, right? So I talked to Kate, and Kate said, yeah, and she has a couple of restaurants. She's invested in a restaurant in Rockford. And so she said, I know a chef that I can send on my pay grade, on my time, to come and offer cooking and baking classes. So we introduced the kids. We just threw it out there because food is a problem. In the west side of Rockford, there is virtually the only grocery store there is Aldi. And the rest is the 7-Eleven and mom and pop commercial shop where they exploit, because no grocery store wants to go to the west side. So when we introduced cooking, the first day we asked students to sign up for cooking. I thought if we get 10 kids signing up for cooking, it's going to be a good number to start with. The first day we had 50 kids showed up. And I'm going, what the heck, what do? We thought, and because this school used to be a high school that became a middle school. So they have the space. For a high school, they have the basics, and it's an old high school built kind of a while back. So it's got all the home economics department and all of that. And 50 kids showing up with one volunteer. So we had to jump in to help support. And then we split the group. By the end of 2 weeks, we have over 200 kids learning to cook and to bake. So that means there is a need for a healthy food. And it's basically pasta and making their own pasta sauce from scratch. And all the salad dressings from scratch. It became a heap, and we realized there's much more than this. And so we introduced baking, we introduced gardening, and all of this, as we're introducing all of this behind the scene, something is beginning to happen in the school, because the kids now want to stay in school longer until after school for the sake of after school program. And let me say this, before we got there, the school was being patrolled by police officers. And so the idea of seeing their fellow kids being arrested is just the norm. And so as a community group, we requested that police officers we asked the police department for a 1-month moratorium that we will do, the volunteers will man that. So we became lunch aid, no more police, and fire alarm, as usual, was pulled into up in the school like 3 or 4 times during the day. And when you do that, think about all the amount of learning that is being lost. So by the creative ideas of after-school program that we introduced to the school, it began to create a healthy appreciation for being in school. And I don't know if this is nationwide, but in Illinois, you cannot play sports if you don't have physical check. And at the middle school level, when we're trying to figure out how to get that energy to burn those calories, what can you do? You have to do something. So, and the parents, these are kids that most of them don't have any medical insurance. And the parents, the single moms or the single dad, really don't have time. They work multiple jobs. And so what do? We partner with a regional hospital that is close by. And we were able to get the regional hospital to get doctors to come and do physical exam, but we still need permission slip, right? Like release form from the parents. We followed hundreds of these kids to sign those release forms. I'm glad when I say this, I just happened to be the coordinator. I happened to be the visionary guy, and I didn't do it. I would just say, we need to do this to address this. And so we had all these roles of volunteers and doing everything. And then to add more pain to the challenge that these kids are already facing, that particular public school requires that middle school students wear school uniform. And they don't have money for uniform. And for those that have uniform, they don't even have time. They don't have lunch. With 90% success rate graduation to high school and finishing high school. Right now, we are seeing a group of students that are not only graduating high school, but graduating community college and even four-year college. Why is that possible? It is possible because we look at transformations and practices that we can bring that will aid educators to do their job. Educators are sometimes not counselors, they're not social workers, but they too need stability. So as a community, sometimes we hear from the cry of the teachers and we institute what we hear their own cry. So lastly, before I play that video, is we introduce what we call a recovery room. For lack of a better word, I look back at the use of that word, I go, how did we? You know, recovery room is when you come from a surgery, they send you to a recovery room. But this is not surgery, but somehow we just couldn't come up with a good name. But the recovery room is we recruit volunteers from the community. And as a pastor in the community, I said, my number one condition is there is no proselytizing. You're here not to preach, you're here to listen and have a conversation with these kids. I have had many a pastor tell me, this has been more healing for me than they have ever taught. Because they hear gory stories, not because of the gory stories, the challenges that the children were going through, the kind of condition, underlying home condition that they come from, and we still expect them to succeed in society. So educators have the task of seeing the ebb and flow and to reimagine. And sometimes your sense of call is to tell the community, we see this. Is there a way that you have pastors, you have community leaders, is there a way that your community group can help organize and change this? Because as an educator, your hands are sometimes technically tied because of the institutional contract or whatever, that there are things that you cannot do, but there are things that you can give voice to. So back to the school uniform. They kick students out of school because of school uniform. And we looked at it and I said, is there any way we can fundraise? So I put an article in the local newspaper. I said, we just need $5,000 to buy enough school uniforms and we'll recycle them. And the first day it went in the local newspaper, a woman called me and said, I have $25,000 for you. Walmart, the area manager for Walmart says, whatever money you have, we will give you the prices of the uniform at 50%. So we're half in the price, whatever number. 970 uniforms for 50% discount, that is a heck of a money. And so, because of that discount, we were able to start a laundry services in the school. And the laundry services wasn't, we will get a laundromat. As part of the requirement for the kids, everybody gets a uniform. But you bring it back on Friday. And everybody gets signed up on a schedule to do the laundry over the weekend. So we're not doing it for them. We were involving the students in troubleshooting. And then I'll show you the video and I'll tell you about transition to how does this one public school's impact became a model to impacting other schools. This one is a little bit loud.
The renewal of the defunct parent-teacher organization.
And as 23 News reporter Kimberly Brown reports, it's taken 6 months to get the support needed for this rebound. The halls at West Middle School are quiet, but that's not how it's always been.
In the past, for those that are probably familiar with West, it's been like a battleground. Every single day there's police here and there, fire alarm being pulled.
Those problems prompted this community group led by Pastor Samuel Sarpiya to intervene and change the school's reputation. They started Rockford Partners for Excellence last fall. They meet at West Middle School each week to brainstorm ideas to improve the school. Now they're seeing results, starting with a new and improved parent-teacher organization that school administrators say is working.
Our students have a new energy. Our teachers have an energy because when they see parents walking the halls, they feel a little more accountable.
The PTO at West was inactive for several years. Today it has about 40 people. The new PTO is meant to bring hope to West, something some parents say students and teachers need.
You have such an impact on all your kids' lives, and it's not just my children that are here, it's all of them.
School leaders think students are becoming more interested in what they learn and have a new attitude about school.
I look at the kids now, they're proud of being West Warriors, and this is just for the beginning.
They're giving us a renewed sense of hope at West.
Organizers hope kids at West Middle School will carry over their newfound interest to the next level, high school.
So how did we get a white parent to be a PTO? I went to the highway and the byway and recruited parents that have no kids in the school to become part of the PTO. It worked. Parents that are passionate about seeing other kids like their children started volunteering. Before we realized it, we have 200 PTO members showing up for meeting and caring for the kids as though they're their parents, because they are volunteers in the school. They are in the school, walking the hallways, helping, having lunch, serving as lunch aides, and serving as buddies and friends to this kid. And you're constantly, so the familiarity, you begin to become a positive attitude. And as a result of that, because of the improvement, you know, I started with 2 police officers shooting a teenager. I'm coming back to that same story. So now that we've seen success, and you begin to give us a voice as a community to speak to the powers that be, not in a confrontational way, in strategizing, how do we improve relationship between communities of color and the police department? So I worked behind the scene with the police department, and we eventually introduced nonviolence community policing in the city of Rockford, which involved actually taking it to the poll and the citizens voting to put additional taxes on themselves to build 3 police districts instead of 1 big building. But the result is we were able to eventually develop a systematic partnership where I have what we call the Mobile Tech Lab. The Mobile Tech Lab was a lab. I'm always visionary. You can tell I think outside the box all the time. The Mobile Tech Lab, sincerely, is the first tech lab in the US. The Mobile Tech Lab is, the police department had 2 trailers, 2 26-foot trailers that were given to them from FEMA. And these trailers have been sitting in the park, in the station, and not in the yard, and not being used. So I had this brilliant visionary idea where the police and the community will partner to bring some kind of radical educational transformation in the city. And one of the radical transformation in the city is the history of Rockford is an industrial town. And I keep hearing people saying manufacturing returning. I said, good luck with manufacturing returning. I don't want my children to go work in a factory. But there is a new kind of factory. It's called computer programming. And I, in 2016, began to introduce kids in the housing project into computer programming. And I said one day we were meeting in the city in the police department, having this brainstorming. And I said, when we chat, I said, do you, the police department, can help us? If we can together collaborate and build a mobile tech lab. And I drew the design of what I see this lab performing. I have never seen a mobile tech lab anywhere, but I know what it should look like. Background, I'm a computer system administrator and security background in my one life. So because I have that and I know the power, and I made a lot of money out of it. I worked for a bank, I subcontracted for a bank in South Africa to install ATMs and do all kinds of network security. So I made enough money there that I work for 6 months and go become a missionary for 6 months and then come back for 6 months. So I kind of have that niche, and I'm self-taught. Because computer security involves a lot of programming behind the scenes. So I said, if we can build a mobile tech lab and a mobile recording studio, so we combine both in the same, because if I want to attract minority kids, the one thing they want to do is sports or music. But if I combine a music recording studio and a tech, I'm getting 2 for the price of 1. The music would attract them, but my goal is I don't care for music. My goal is to get them educated in computer programming. So because of the success from West Middle School, and then we've gone to Lincoln Middle School, we've gone to a couple of middle schools in our city. We had 7 middle schools in our city. So because we've permeated all the problem middle schools, and things are really taken some good shape. So I, together with the police department, created this mobile tech lab. And the mobile tech lab is to train kids in coding. And so I'm not taking you down that route, but I'll take you the other route. Not the coding part, but I'll take you the other route, which music. So, and I started coming with a creative idea. How do we instill in the elementary kids the idea of civility? The idea of sowing the words of peace, because kindness and caring for each other is something that you learn from a child. When you're an adult, it is difficult to be able to learn some of the basic skills that you need. And I partner with, what do you call it? The Peace Plaza. There's a place in Rockford called the Peace Plaza where we always have like International Day of Prayer for Peace campaign, which is International Day for Peace, which is a UN declaration, September 21st. And so I partner with the group that organized that. I said, how about, I'm not making it Christian. How about I start writing, I outsource, because I have a mobile recording studio and we've done a couple of recordings for kids and for the African-American community. But how about we now branch into the public school arena to write an annual song for the kids? And they thought it's a brilliant idea. And I go, bingo, I consulted a friend of mine that said, I'm not a musician by any means. I don't even play any instrument. But somehow I know I have an idea of the sense of the power of music. So then we partner with the Peace Plaza. And in 2017, we did the first elementary school mobile recording. And then since then, every year for the Peace Day, we have a different song, and I will close by playing this music for you. This is inside of the mobile tech lab and the mobile recording studio.
Choice, always a choice. We choose civility. We are one shape, though many sided. We differ, but we're united. More than just get along. Together we get it right. What we got, we give. Our peace, we give. What we
concept about it. So, questions, comments, any further questions?
I think it's interesting that the underlying, you don't even have to diagnose sometimes the underlying conditions. If you go, instead of directly combating or going after addressing those, but instead you do something positive. So instead of trying to correct something negative, you're creating something positive. And that's, I think as an educator, that's what we try to do in the classroom, is how do you get something, like I teach writing. So I don't just correct things. I pull out the positive. They're more motivated if they understand that their voice matters. So we focus on their voice, and then we get to, it's like that roundabout, but it's through the positive. It's like we're all wired to respond more when there's the positive opportunity rather than a correction.
That's
It's powerful how you really identify the strengths
Yeah.
that are there in the community as a way to overcome those limitations.
And that's public health. Like what we focus in on public health is what are the assets in the community that you can build upon, not just going into a community and say, these are the things you're doing wrong. And so it's a beautiful story of how public health can actually work in a setting. Like you wouldn't consider yourself a public health professional, but I would. What you're doing is beautiful in a community.
Yeah.
It's beautiful in a community. You're taking what's assets in a community, the needs of a community, addressing them in a way that hasn't been addressed before. So to me, that's community work. That's community, that's public health. Because what you're doing for those kids and giving them hope and giving them an education, how is that going to impact their overall health later in life? They're not going to potentially get into drugs or violence, and they might be, contributing to society in different ways that if they would have stayed in that, they would have never done. So from a public health perspective, that's public health.
to respond to that. I'll tell a story. It's on my presentation for tonight. And I don't know if it's there. I have too many movies. I don't know where I have to. If I see it, I'll remember. But if you hear it, do. My coding program targeted in Chicago to attend a coding boot camp is $10,000. But I decided to recruit computer programmers because I have this insight that I think it comes from God to solve problems. And I wanted to change the face of my city in a very affirmative way. And I prefer being on the background. So I recruited a programmer who is a former Marine, who now runs some fast growing company, does a lot of work for Google and sometimes for Amazon. And I hired him. I said, would you be, because I knew him through a friend of mine who is my bank, it's my financial advisor that became my friend. So, and he said he's one of the clients that he's advising is a computer programmer. So we quickly formed this computer boot camp. So we targeted 10 kids. But the situation happened that I'm telling the story of this particular one boy. Laquan came to me and said, we were at some community event and he walked up to me. I never met him. He said, Samuel, somebody said I should talk to you. Okay. The first thing out of his mouth after that is, I don't want to go to jail. And I'm going, technically I work in partnership with the police department. Whatever you say to me, I will take you to the police department and you end up in jail. He said, yes, but I don't want to. That's why I'm talking to you. He said, would you help me? And I had been planning this computer program, this 2-week style boot camp. And I said to him, in 2 weeks, I have a computer programming that I'm introducing. He's a high schooler, but he's in an alternative high school because he's already been in trouble. And he said, yeah. So I gave him my number casually. I said, call me next week. The next morning, I got a first call. I said, yeah, I'm here. No, I'm just checking if the number is working. That same day, I got another call. I got a call 3 times. So my conversation with him became an anchor, a lifeline. So by the end, to cut the whole story short, I eventually found out from him the reason why he's calling me is people have promised him over and over that they will help him and nobody helped him. And he really, his mother is in jail, his father is in jail, and he is currently living with an uncle that is headed to jail. And they're living in a boarded house that have no electricity in the dead heat of summer in the Midwest. And I guess no running water. I wonder. So because of that, I got him to, in one of our community transformation, my work with the police department, we have neighborhood houses where police officers go read for kids in the neighborhood. And I got him an access to that neighborhood house to shower, to have some breakfast, because there's always food in the neighborhood house, and actually to become a buddy with one of the officers. And so 2 weeks into the computer programming, the programmer called me. He said, there's something about this kid. He said, because we give them a sandbox in the programming language, we call it a sandbox, where you have a little place where you practice and your professor or your teacher is looking at your work and your coding skill. And we noticed that he logged in for an hour and then he gets a different IP address, log in for another hour, gets a different IP address. But for some bizarre reason, I never asked, do you have computer at home? Do you have, even though all of this, but because that wasn't, mine was loading him with information. But what he was doing was he was going to the public library. The public library in Rockford only allows you to work for an hour on a computer. And then it kicks you out. So he jumps on a different computer. So by the end of the day, he will have 8 IP addresses. That means he's spending 8 hours practicing. That is determination. And it turns out that he was one of the best kids in the class. And that guy just hired him immediately. So today, Laquan would have been in jail, but he is not. He is a full-fledged computer programmer. So just to think about that, it's like, if only one life can be changed, not end with 2 bullets or whatever the number of bullets, then it makes me feel fulfilled. And that computer programming has grown from just an ordinary small to become part of the college, community college program. So we've built a partnership, so we've built a pipeline. So it's not always stopping with us, it's how do we become the shoulder for you to get to the next place. So I never know that I'll do public health. Because now I add to my resume public.
Well, we talk about linkers, your linkage, you're able to make the connections between the needs and the people that can fulfill it. And being that linker, that's what makes you a public health professional. That's what public health does.
So I'll tease my kids. I'll quote you. I'll tell my kids. See?
Well, it's recorded, so.
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell my kids always joke with me that I'm a doctor. I said, yes, I'm a doctor and I can give you shots at home. And they go, but you're not a medical doctor. I said, I'm just a doctor. So
Sammy, my name is Chip. We made a lunch
yeah,
today.
your wife was in the
Yes.
other class this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm making sure that I remind you of my name.
She how do you pronounce your name? CH?
Chip.
Chip.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember how to spell your name, but I couldn't.
Trying to test your memory. But in listening, and part of the work that I do here and around the world, it's just around the world of transformation, the things we do, and their opportunities and their challenges that work. And so I'm just curious from what you see and what you've done in terms of like, I hate to come from a negative perspective, like what are the obstacles, I guess, as you see, like what gets in the way? Because I've met a lot of people that have a deep desire to bring about change and transformation in the society. But sometimes I don't know what gets in the way.
I am so anchored in my faith that I'm not afraid to try and fail. Because I'm not doing this for any, not for street credit, not for my resume, not for a living. It's an inner passion to see change. And you cannot believe how much I've poured out of my own personal finances. And I never allow finances to become an obstacle. So that's the first. The biggest obstacle is money. All of this that I do has never been my bread and butter. I have my own means of livelihood. I pastor a church. And half of my salary goes into this. And I come home to a screaming wife. And I go, you married me. You knew the deal. You were a missionary when I met you, so I was a missionary, so we're all sold out for this. So there's that mutual understanding. And I don't see it as me alone. My entire family is behind this. So that home obstacle that happens in the home, we're constantly giving of yourself. We're constantly giving of ourselves. My kids are involved. So we see it as a sense of a family call. So that particular family barrier is being taken care of. And then the second obstacle is the bureaucratic bottleneck. I do not believe in grant. No, I do not depend on grant. I do not depend on grant. I depend on goodwill of people, and sometimes goodwill is not cash. The computer programmer that I hired, Justin Scott, he could have charged me $50,000. But because I communicated a vision for him, he was willing to shut his business for a season to teach. People don't invest for a project. They invest into a vision. So oftentimes good-minded people struggle because they don't communicate the vision across. So with the city of Rockford and getting that trailer, I was donated the trailer by the police chief. And he suddenly realized it is impossible, he has no right. This trailer belongs to the city of Rockford. And they're just the fiduciary holders of the trailer. So there we began the journey of 1 year of waiting for a trailer for 1 year, of past going through the hoops. By the time it came finally to the city council for a vote, there was 100% unanimous vote, and they said, why didn't we do this long ago? And not only voting, they said, how can we help you? And because they acknowledge it, the sheriff, the county board chair called me and said, I have $10,000 for you to remodel the trailer the way you want it. Because he heard that the city council overwhelmingly support this project. So there are obstacles along the way, but I tend to, I'm a half glass full guy. And again, I said, I think outside of the box constantly. And it's a gift that I acknowledge is given by God, that I don't get really discouraged easily. So that's why my next book, I'm working on resilience, the nonviolence ability to develop a resilience in a nonviolent strategy. We live in a world that if you do not have resilience, it is hard to survive. We can all get discouraged. There are days that I want to run away from everything that I do. And this is, I'm talking US context. I've not even scratched a single word of the work of transformation that I'm doing in Nigeria with a mobile library. That's a whole different chapter for another day. Yeah, and all the obstacle that you ship a 40-foot container of books, and all of a sudden that container is stuck in the shipyard for months on end. And you're looking and counting how many dollars you need to pay for every day's charges because of corruption. And having to fly to Nigeria that I don't deserve to fly just to go defend myself before some public officer because I have determined I will never give bribes. If it's a legal, legitimate bill, I'll pay the legitimate bill. But you know, sometimes in the developing world, they tell you it's a bill, but it's not a bill. Show me according to books. And the problem, one thing with me is I read the law. So when I see the law, I say, okay, let's do a little bit of the numbers, and I will not be confrontational about it. I'll be very relational. And that's something that I found works. When in the 6 principles of nonviolence, attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. Because the person that's doing evil, sometimes they're perpetuating an evil that they too have been a product of the same evil system. And they can't help themselves. So when you attack them, they feel personally attacked. But when you help them see the unjust system that is at work, they are liberated, you are liberated, and the cause of justice is accomplished. I know I didn't answer you, but I just.
That is very good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, family, and one goes on in the family before somebody arrives to work, but it kind of like don't always get acknowledged as part of the work. And it can get in the way, so.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this. And I know many others will be able to benefit from the recording, so I appreciate you being willing to be recorded.
Okay, thank you.